The old lady's bookstore is about to be sold. But then her cat, Agnes, peered out the dusty window of her bookstore. Book Nook, watching the swirling snowflakes fall on the quiet main street of Elmwood. The cheery Christmas decorations adorning the lampposts did little to brighten her mood. It was a Tuesday afternoon, typically a slow day, but lately, every day felt like a Tuesday. The rise of online retailers and ebooks had hit her business hard. Agnes sighed, her gaze falling on the empty armchair by the fireplace, usually occupied by her loyal customer and dear friend, George. George, a retired librarian with a penchant for historical biographies, was battling a nasty cold and hadn't been able to visit the bookstore for the past week. A woman in her late 70s had poured her heart and soul into the Book Nook for over 40 years. The store was more than just a business to her. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could share her love of books with the community. The scent of old paper and leather, the comforting weight of a well-loved volume in her hands, the quiet murmur of turning pages. These were the things that brought her joy. But lately, the joy had been replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Sales were dwindling, and the bills were piling up. Agnes had even started dipping into her meager savings to keep the store afloat. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the shelves, Agnes decided to close up early. She flipped the sign on the door to closed, switched off the lights, and was about to lock up when she heard a faint scratching sound. She turned to see a small, gray cat peering at her through the glass door, its eyes wide and pleading. Agnes hesitated. She wasn't a cat person, never had been. But there was something about the creature's forlorn expression that tugged at her heartstrings. Cautiously, she opened the door a crack. The cat darted inside, its thin body shivering from the cold. Agnes watched as it explored the bookstore, sniffing at the bookshelves and rubbing against the legs of the tables. It seemed harmless enough, even a little charming with its curious demeanor and soft, gray fur. "Well, aren't you a brave one?" Agnes murmured, her voice softer than she intended. She went to the back room and found an old cardboard box, which she lined with a cozy blanket. She then poured some milk into a saucer and placed it on the floor. The cat, seemingly famished, lapped up the milk in a matter of seconds. Agnes watched the cat curl up in the box, its purring filling the quiet bookstore. A sense of warmth spread through her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Perhaps having a little company wouldn't be so bad after all. "I suppose you can stay for the night," she said to the cat. "But you'll have to leave in the morning. I can't have a cat living in my bookstore." The cat, oblivious to Agnes's words, continued to purr contentedly. Agnes smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She decided to name the cat Emily, after Emily Dickinson, one of her favorite poets. Little did Agnes know that Emily's arrival would mark a turning point in her life, bringing unexpected joy and a renewed sense of purpose. The quiet bookstore, once filled with only the whispers of forgotten stories, was about to come alive with the purrs of a very special cat. The next morning, Agnes woke to the sound of soft meows and the sight of Emily rubbing against her legs. She had forgotten all about the cat and was momentarily startled. Then, a smile spread across her face. Emily, with her big green eyes and gentle purrs, had a way of disarming even the most hardened skeptic. "Well, Emily," Agnes said, scratching the cat behind the ears, "it seems you've made yourself quite at home." Agnes decided to keep Emily for a few more days, just until she could find a suitable home for her. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Emily had no intention of leaving. She had become an integral part of the bookstore, greeting customers with a friendly meow and curling up on laps while they browsed the shelves. Emily had a peculiar habit of sitting in front of certain books, seemingly recommending them to customers. At first, Agnes dismissed it as coincidence, but then she noticed a pattern. The books Emily chose were often overlooked, hidden gems that deserved more attention. And to Agnes's surprise, customers were actually buying them. Word of the bookish cat spread throughout Elmwood. People who had never set foot in the Book Nook before were now curious to see the cat that could pick out the perfect read. The bookstore, once quiet and deserted, was now bustling with activity. Children giggled as Emily chased a feather toy. Adults exchanged knowing smiles as the cat led them to a hidden treasure on the shelves. And even the most cynical teenagers couldn't resist petting her soft fur. One afternoon, a young woman named Sarah walked into the bookstore. She looked lost and overwhelmed by the sheer number of books. Emily, sensing her hesitation, jumped off Agnes's lap and led Sarah to a shelf filled with poetry collections. She sat in front of a particular book, nudging it with her paw. Sarah, intrigued, picked up the book. It was a collection of poems by Mary Oliver, a poet she had never heard of before. She opened the book and began reading, her eyes widening with delight. "This is amazing," she exclaimed. "How did you know I would love this?" Agnes, watching the scene unfold, couldn't help but smile. "It seems Emily has a knack for choosing the right book for the right person," she said. Sarah ended up buying the book, along with several others that Emily recommended. As she left the store, she thanked Agnes and gave Emily a gentle pat on the head. "You're a very special cat," she said. Agnes watched Sarah walk away, a sense of wonder filling her heart. Emily, the stray cat she had taken in out of pity, had become her unlikely savior. She had brought life back into the bookstore, not just with her playful antics but with her uncanny ability to connect people with the books they needed. That evening, as Agnes closed up the store, she looked at Emily, curled up asleep on a pile of books. "You're not just a cat, Emily," she whispered. "You're my little miracle." The arrival of spring brought a fresh wave of optimism to Elmwood, and to the Book Nook. The store was thriving, thanks in no small part to Emily, who had become a local celebrity. Agnes, rejuvenated by the bookstore's success and Emily's companionship, felt a lightness in her step she hadn't experienced in years. She even started hosting book clubs and poetry readings, events that brought the community together and filled the bookstore with laughter and lively discussions. One sunny afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the Book Nook. The tall, well-dressed man in his late 40s stepped out and strode into the store, his eyes scanning the shelves with a detached air. Agnes, sensing a potential customer, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said. "Can I help you find something?" The man introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, a property developer with ambitious plans for Elmwood's Main Street. He expressed his admiration for the bookstore's quaint charm, but then proceeded to lay out his proposal. He wanted to buy Agnes's property and transform it into a modern coffee shop, complete with Wi-Fi and trendy decor. Agnes felt a wave of shock wash over her. She had never considered selling the bookstore, not even in its darkest days. The Book Nook was more than just a building. It was her life's work, her legacy. Mr. Henderson, sensing her hesitation, sweetened the deal. He offered Agnes a substantial sum of money, enough to secure her financial future and allow her to retire comfortably. He assured her that the coffee shop would be a valuable addition to the community, a place where people could gather and socialize. Agnes listened politely, her mind racing. Mr. Henderson's offer was tempting, undeniably so. She was getting older, and the thought of retiring, of not having to worry about the bookstore's finances, was appealing. But the idea of losing the Book Nook, of seeing it replaced by a generic coffee shop, filled her with a deep sadness. "I need some time to think about it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Henderson nodded understandingly. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need. But I must warn you, this offer won't be on the table forever." He handed her his business card and left the bookstore, leaving Agnes in a state of turmoil. She looked at Emily, who was perched on the counter, watching her with an uncharacteristic seriousness. "What am I going to do, Emily?" she whispered, her voice heavy with uncertainty. Emily, as if sensing her distress, jumped off the counter and rubbed against her legs, purring softly. Agnes picked her up and held her close, drawing comfort from the cat's warmth and gentle purrs. That night, Agnes tossed and turned in bed, her mind filled with conflicting thoughts. The bookstore was her passion, her home, but it was also a burden, a constant source of worry. Mr. Henderson's offer represented a way out, a chance for a peaceful retirement. But at what cost? The next morning, Agnes decided to seek the counsel of her dear friend, George. She bundled up in her warmest coat, braving the lingering chill of early spring, and walked the short distance to George's cozy cottage. George, a man of routine and order, was already awake, sipping his tea and reading the morning newspaper. "Agnes, what a pleasant surprise!" he exclaimed, his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Agnes recounted her encounter with Mr. Henderson and the developer's proposition. George listened attentively, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's a difficult decision, Agnes," he said, setting down his teacup. "On the one hand, you've poured your heart and soul into that bookstore. It's more than just a business to you. It's a part of you." "Exactly," Agnes said, her voice filled with emotion. "But I can't deny the appeal of financial security. I'm not getting any younger, George. And the bookstore, it's a constant struggle." George nodded understandingly. "I know, Agnes, but have you considered the impact this would have on the community? The Book Nook is a haven for book lovers, a place where people connect and share their passion for literature. What would Elmwood be without it?" Agnes hadn't thought about it that way. She had been so focused on her own concerns that she had overlooked the bookstore's role in the community. George's words struck a chord within her, reminding her of the joy and sense of belonging the Book Nook provided to so many people. "You're right, George," she said, a renewed sense of determination in her voice. "The Book Nook is more than just a bookstore. It's a part of Elmwood's soul." "Indeed it is," George said, a smile spreading across his face. "And I have a feeling that Emily wouldn't be too happy about losing her home." Agnes laughed, the tension easing from her shoulders. "You're right about that. Emily has become quite the guardian of the Book Nook." George leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "Perhaps Emily has a plan of her own," he said mischievously. Agnes, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," George said, "cats are known for their cunning and resourcefulness. Who knows what Emily might be capable of?" Agnes chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh, George, you're incorrigible." But as she walked back to the bookstore, Agnes couldn't help but wonder if George was right. Emily had surprised her before with her uncanny ability to choose the perfect book for the right person. Perhaps she had a few more surprises up her sleeve. Agnes returned to the Book Nook with a renewed sense of purpose. George's words had resonated deeply, reminding her of the bookstore's importance to the community. She couldn't bear the thought of it being replaced by a soulless coffee shop. But what could she do? Mr. Henderson's offer was still looming, a tempting escape from her financial worries. As she pondered her predicament, she noticed Emily behaving strangely. The cat was pacing restlessly, her tail twitching, and she kept looking towards the door with an anxious expression. Agnes had never seen Emily like this before. Usually, the cat was the picture of serenity, content to curl up on a pile of books or bask in the sunbeams streaming through the window. Suddenly, Emily darted towards the door, letting out a series of insistent meows. Agnes, curious, followed her. Just as she reached the door, it swung open, revealing Mr. Henderson. A smug smile plastered on his face. "Good morning, Ms. Agnes," he said, stepping inside. "I trust you've had time to consider my offer?" Before Agnes could respond, Emily launched herself at Mr. Henderson, hissing and scratching. The developer, startled and clearly not a cat person, let out a yelp and stumbled backward. He tripped over a stack of books and landed with a thud on the floor, his neatly pressed suit now covered in dust. Agnes, initially shocked by Emily's outburst, couldn't help but suppress a giggle. Emily, perched on a bookshelf, glared down at Mr. Henderson with a triumphant air. Mr. Henderson, flustered and embarrassed, quickly regained his composure. He brushed himself off and glared at Emily. "That cat needs to be disciplined," he said, his voice tight with annoyance. "Emily was just protecting her home. Agnes said, her voice firm. "And I believe she has something to say to you, Mr." Henderson looked at her with a puzzled expression. Agnes, emboldened by Emily's courage, decided to speak her mind. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "I appreciate your offer, but I've decided not to sell the bookstore. The Book Nook is more than just a building. It's a part of this community, and I intend to keep it that way." Mr. Henderson's face turned red with anger. "You'll regret this, Ms. Agnes," he sputtered. "You're throwing away a golden opportunity." He stormed out of the bookstore, slamming the door behind him. Agnes let out a sigh of relief, her heart pounding. She looked at Emily, who was now purring contentedly. "Well done, Emily," she said, scooping up the cat and giving her a hug. "You've saved the day." News of Emily's attack on Mr. Henderson spread like wildfire through Elmwood. The local newspaper even ran a story about it, with a picture of Emily perched on the bookshelf, looking like a feline superhero. The community rallied around Agnes and the Book Nook, praising Emily for her bravery and condemning Mr. Henderson's greed. Agnes, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, realized that she wasn't alone in this fight. The Book Nook was more than just her bookstore. It belonged to Elmwood, and with Emily by her side, she was ready to face any challenge. The incident with Emily and Mr. Henderson became a turning point. It wasn't just about a cat defending her home. It was about a community realizing the value of something precious they were about to lose. The Book Nook, a quiet sanctuary for so long, was suddenly thrust into the limelight. The local newspaper, the Elmwood Gazette, ran a front-page story with the headline "Brave Cat Defends Beloved Bookstore from Greedy Developer." The article, complete with a photo of Emily perched majestically on a stack of books, painted Agnes as a local hero and Mr. Henderson as a villain. The story caught the attention of the regional news, and soon, the Book Nook and its feline guardian were making headlines across the state. The community of Elmwood, a quiet town where change came slowly, was galvanized into action. A Save the Book Nook campaign was launched, spearheaded by a group of passionate residents, including Sarah, the young woman who had discovered Mary Oliver's poetry thanks to Emily. They organized fundraising events, from bake sales to book readings, with all proceeds going towards supporting the bookstore. Petitions were circulated, urging the town council to declare the Book Nook a historical landmark, thus protecting it from demolition. Agnes, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, found herself at the center of a movement. She gave interviews to local and regional news outlets, sharing her story and emphasizing the importance of preserving local businesses and community spaces. She spoke with a passion and eloquence she never knew she possessed, her words resonating with people far beyond Elmwood. The town council, facing mounting public pressure, called a special meeting to discuss the fate of the Book Nook. The meeting was packed with residents, many wearing "Save the Book Nook" buttons and carrying signs with slogans like "Books Not Beans" and "Emily for Mayor." Agnes, accompanied by George and Emily, who, despite the commotion, remained remarkably calm, addressed the council, her voice filled with emotion. "The Book Nook is more than just a bookstore," she said. "It's a place where stories come alive, where friendships are formed, and where memories are made. It's a part of Elmwood's history, and it deserves to be protected." The council members, moved by Agnes's words and the overwhelming support from the community, voted unanimously to declare the Book Nook a historical landmark. The room erupted in cheers, and Agnes, tears streaming down her face, hugged George and Emily tightly. The victory was not just for Agnes and the Book Nook. It was a victory for the community, a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring love for books and the places that hold them. The defeat of Mr. Henderson's proposal was celebrated throughout Elmwood. The Book Nook, once on the verge of closure, was now a symbol of community spirit and the enduring power of books. Agnes, basking in the glow of newfound appreciation, felt a surge of energy and purpose. She expanded the bookstore's events calendar, hosting author talks, writing workshops, and even a cat appreciation day in honor of Emily. Mr. Henderson, however, was not so pleased. His plans for a trendy coffee shop had been thwarted, and his reputation had taken a hit. The local newspaper, which had initially been supportive of his development project, now portrayed him as a heartless businessman who cared more about profits than people. He became the target of good-natured ribbing at the town's coffee shop, the old-fashioned one, not his envisioned modern version, and even his morning jogs were interrupted by friendly reminders of his defeat. One afternoon, as Mr. Henderson was nursing a bruised ego and a lukewarm latte at the aforementioned coffee shop, he overheard a conversation at the next table. Two elderly women were discussing the Book Nook's latest event, a poetry reading by a local author. "It's wonderful what Agnes has done with that bookstore," one woman said. "It's become a real hub for the community. And that cat," the other woman exclaimed. "Emily is a treasure. She's the heart and soul of that place." Mr. Henderson listened, a strange feeling stirring within him. He had always considered himself a shrewd businessman, a man who knew what people wanted. But perhaps he had misjudged the people of Elmwood. Perhaps they valued something more than just trendy coffee and free Wi-Fi. He thought about Agnes, her passion for books, her dedication to the community. He thought about Emily, the cat who had so fearlessly defended her home. And he thought about the overflowing crowd at the town council meeting, their voices united in support of the Book Nook. A wave of shame washed over him. He had been so focused on his own ambitions that he had failed to see the bigger picture. He had underestimated the power of community, the importance of preserving places that held meaning and history. Mr. Henderson finished his coffee, a decision forming in his mind. He left the coffee shop and walked towards the Book Nook, a sense of purpose in his stride. Agnes was surprised to see Mr. Henderson enter the Book Nook. He looked different somehow, less imposing, more human. He walked towards her, a hesitant smile on his face. "Ms. Agnes," he began, "I've come to apologize. I was wrong to try to buy your bookstore. I was blinded by my own ambitions and failed to see the value of what you've created here." Agnes, taken aback by his sincerity, felt a wave of compassion wash over her. She had been angry with him, yes, but she also recognized the vulnerability beneath his polished exterior. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "I appreciate your apology. Takes a big man to admit he was wrong. I've learned a lot from this experience," he continued. "I've learned that some things are more important than profit. Community, history, passion. These things matter." He paused, then said, "I'd like to make amends. I'd like to help you preserve the Book Nook, ensure its future for generations to come." Agnes's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you have in mind?" Mr. Henderson outlined his plan. He would use his resources and connections to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting independent bookstores. The foundation would provide financial assistance to struggling bookstores, offer workshops and training programs, and advocate for policies that protect local businesses. And the first beneficiary of this foundation would be the Book Nook. Agnes, overwhelmed by his generosity, could barely speak. "Mr. Henderson," she finally said, That's incredible. It's the least I can do," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I want to be a part of something meaningful, something that makes a difference." And so, the Book Nook entered a new chapter in its history. With the support of Mr. Henderson's foundation, Agnes was able to renovate the store, expand its collection, and hire a part-time assistant to help with the growing workload. Emily, of course, remained the star attraction, her fame spreading far beyond Elmwood. She even had her own social media page, managed by Sarah, with thousands of followers who eagerly awaited her latest book recommendations. The Book Nook became more than just a bookstore. It became a cultural center, a place where people from all walks of life came together to celebrate the joy of reading. Agnes, with renewed energy and a heart full of gratitude, continued to preside over her literary haven, knowing that its future was secure. One sunny afternoon, Agnes sat in her armchair by the fireplace, Emily curled up on her lap. George, his cold long gone, sat opposite her, engrossed in a biography of Winston Churchill. The bookstore was filled with the comforting sounds of turning pages and quiet conversations. Agnes smiled, a sense of peace and contentment washing over her. The Book Nook, her beloved bookstore, was thriving, a testament to the power of community, the love of books, and the magic of a very special cat.